How to mount an Azure File Share to an Azure Container Instance. So in this tutorial, we'll go over two methods on how to mount an Azure File Share to an Azure Container Instance. The first one is using the Azure CLI, and the second is using Terraform. For this tutorial, we'll be using a container image provided by Microsoft called ACI Hello Files. This is just a Node.js project which allows you to write files into a mounted volume. In this instance, we'll be writing files to an Azure File Share within a Azure Storage Account. So if you want to get an idea of what this web application actually does, is it runs in the browser. It's just a simple web form. You type in some text that you want to save into a file and you hit submit, and then you can go and check in your file share instance within your storage account. You can browse into it and you can see that that file should have been written. It's a text file, and if you download that text file, that should match exactly what you've written into the web form. We'll first create it via the Azure command line interface, and secondly, we'll create it via Terraform. So let's get started. Okay, so let's use the first method for mounting an Azure File Share to an Azure Container Instance, which is via the Azure CLI. So using the Azure command line interface, we'll do a few steps. We'll create the resource group, we'll create the storage account, we'll create a file share within the storage account, then we'll generate that access key to the storage account. Then finally, we will create the container group with the container instance with the parameters needed to connect to the file share that we've created above. So for the resources that I'm creating, I'll use these attributes here. So resource group name, I'll set it to CESRG. For the storage account name, I'm just using a bunch of text here that are postfixed after SA. For the location, I'm using East US. For the file share name, I'm using ACI File Share. So you'll need to log in first. I've already done that. So the next command that you'll write is for creating the resource group. So AZ group create, specifying a name for the resource group and specifying a location for the resource group. Okay, so that's done. Next, we'll create the storage account underneath that resource group. So I'll use AZ storage account create. I'll specify the resource group name and I'll specify the storage account name. I'll specify a location, and the SKU that we'll be using is standard LRS. Okay, so that's done. Next, we'll create the Azure File Share. We'll use the AZ storage share create command, and we'll use the attributes name and account name. For name, we'll specify the file share name. For the account name, we'll specify the storage account name. Okay, so that's created. Next, we'll generate the storage access key. To do this, we'll use the AZ storage account keys list command, and we'll specify the resource group and account name. For the storage account name as parameters. Okay, so we'll run that command now and grab the storage account access key. So I'll hold on to that for later. And now we'll be running a command to create the container group and the container instance with a mounted file share. So the key thing with the AZ container create command, the key thing that we're sort of learning here is around using the mounted file share. So a couple of parameters that you would want to pay attention to. The first is Azure File Volume Account Name, which needs to be the name of the storage account that contains the Azure File Share. The next is around the Azure File Volume Account key. And for that, we're going to use the access key we created for the storage account to access the file share. The third attribute we need to specify is the Azure File Volume Share name. And this will be the name of the file share that we created above. And finally, the Azure File Volume Mount path. This is where the path within the container where the Azure File Volume will be mounted. So let's run the command now. And a couple of things I didn't cover. So we're using AZ container create. We're specifying the resource group. We're specifying the name of the container group, which is Hello Files. We're specifying the image, which is the ACI Hello Files image provided by Microsoft. We're sending a DNS label to be ACI demo with some text after that. So we'll be accessing this via the web browser using that DNS name label to access it.
we'll be using ports 80, and I've also specified all those attributes that we talked about to do with the Azure file volume. So it looks like that's completed now. So we'll verify that we can write files to the Azure File Share. To do that, first we need to get the fully qualified domain name from the container instance. So we use the AZ container show command for this, and we need to specify the name of the resource group and the name of the container group to get the fully qualified domain name. So let's run that now. So we can see that fully qualified domain name there. So let's copy that and put it into a browser. And what we'll also do is we'll check in the Azure portal and we'll refresh and we'll see that we've got that resource group created. And we can see we've got the container group there and we've got the storage account, and we check that storage account. We can check the file shares. In the file shares, we've got the ACI share file share. So if we go into that and we sort of browse, then we can browse for the files within that file share, and we should see nothing right now. So this is the fully qualified domain name that we pasted into the web browser. And let's test that it works. Let's write something to the file into the file share. Hello, Azure File Share. Let's submit that. Okay, looks like that was successful. If we refresh in the Azure portal, in the Azure File Share, we should see a file created. And if we download that, so we can see the file context that we expect. Hello, Azure File Share. That's what we typed into the browser. So that's working correctly. Now what we've got to do is we need to tear down that infrastructure we created, and we can do that by deleting the resource group. So let's do that now. AZ group delete name, and we're going to specify the name of the resource group. Let's run that now. Okay, that will take a bit of time because it needs to delete all the contents underneath that resource group first and delete the resource group. So let's wait a bit and go from there. Okay, looks like that is successful. If we go into the Azure portal, under resource groups, and we refresh, we should see that that is gone now. Okay, so now we'll move to using Terraform to provision this infrastructure. So what you can see here is my resource groups in the Azure portal. You can see we've got no resource groups there right now. So let's use Terraform to set up the resource group and all the resources required underneath it to mount an Azure File Share to a container instance in Azure. Now, Terraform simplifies things a lot. You can define everything as infrastructure as a code. So you can put that into your source code repository and track that very easily over time. So it's easy for version management, and you can see exactly what resources you are provisioning, and you can track that over time. So that's one of the benefits of using infrastructure as a code in Terraform. So what you'll need to do is you'll obviously need to have Terraform installed first on your machine. So I'm not going to cover that in this tutorial. So that's a dependency you need to set up first before starting this. So what we'll have is a main.tf file we'll be using to provision the infrastructure within Azure. And in that main.tf file, we'll have a couple of things that we want to create. Now, we created these things via the command line interface in the previous step, so you'll be familiar with some of this stuff. So we need the resource group, we need the storage account, we need the Azure File Share on that storage account, and then we'll be creating the Azure Container Group, which has one container instance in it as well. And we'll specify a volume, which will be the file share that we created above. So that's what we'll be creating with this main.tf file. And this is the full file itself. You can copy that and use it if you want to from the post that's linked in the description. So you can see we're using the HashiCorp Azure RM provider, and we're using a specific version as marked here. And we'll get into exactly what resources we need. So as you can see from line 16 here, we are requesting a resource group, and we're just calling it Cloud Engineer Skills ACI TF RG. Now you can replace this if you want to, it's completely up to you. We're going to need to specify a location. I'm using West US 2 here. And you can also put tags in, which is very useful if you want to be able to sort of locate all your resources that you provisioned using Terraform. You can specify the source as Terraform, And you can set other values like environment owner, whatever you want to put there, you can put there. And it makes it really easy when you want to find your resources later. You can filter by that, by those tags. So that will be the resource group. And then you're going to need to create the storage account. So we're going to use the resource type Azure RM Storage Account. And you give it a name. And this needs to be a unique name across the whole of Azure. Specify a resource group name. And you can get that by accessing the resource group above and using the RG, which is the resource group that you've created, and specify .name, and you can get that from the resource group. The same thing for the location. So basically that just helps. You don't have to sort of rekey that information. You can just get that from the previous resource that's been created. And Terraform can see that there's a dependency here, and that this needs to be created first before this can be created. We're going to use storage v2 for the account kind, and for the account tier we'll be using standard, and for the account replication type we'll be using LRS. And I've specified the same tags here as well. Next, we've got the storage account here that we've just created. We'll also need to create a file share on that storage account. So this is another dependent relationship we have here. So what we need to do here is we need to specify we want an Azure RM storage share as a resource, and we're giving it a name here. And also it needs the storage account name, and we're going to get that storage account name from the storage account. So we're going to reference that here so they can see that there's a dependency. For the access tier, we're using transaction optimized, and a quota we're using 1024. So that covers the first three things here: resource group, storage account, and file share. And now for the final thing we need to create, which is the container group and the container instance. So we need to use Azure RM container group for this. Specify a name for the container group, and a location and a resource group name that we can get from the resource group. We can use a standard SKU type. We're going to use a public IP address type, and we're going to use a Linux OS type. And the DNS name label, this will be what we put into the browser to locate our container instance running. So I've put something here, hello, which is the value I've used is Cloud Engineer Skills, Hello Files, ACITF. You can change this to whatever you want, so that's completely up to you. And then for the container, we're going to give the container name, we're going to set that to ACI Hello World. We're going to use the Hello Files image provided by Microsoft. And we're going to use 1 CPU core and 1 gigabyte of memory. We're going to use port 80, which is in the TCP protocol. And here's where we'll specify the Azure File Share. So this is in a volume block. We're going to give the volume name my volume. The mount path will be /ACI/log/. We're going to give the storage account name. We're going to give the storage account key, and we'll access those two variables off the storage account that we created above. In the first case, we'll use the name variable off the storage account. In the second case, we'll be using the primary access key for the storage account key. Then we need to give the share name, and we're going to pull that off the file share that we created above and just access the name attribute off that. And we'll give that some tags as well. So that's the structure of the main.tf file. So when we were reading through the blog post, we were talking about a main.tf file, which is used for provisioning the infrastructure within Azure. So I'm just moving into the correct directory to find that main.tf file. So if I clear the screen and then I list the files, I've got this main.tf file there. So what do I need to do next? I need to use Terraform init to make sure we download that provider plugin. So that has been initialized. We've downloaded that provider. So next what we need to do is use Terraform apply to provision that infrastructure. So this message is telling you that it wants to provision 4 different resources on your Azure account. So it's got a file share resource, this should be a storage account resource, a resource group resource, and a container group resource, which contains the container instance. So we're comfortable with that, so we'll say yes. So we'll proceed to provision all those resources on your behalf. Okay, so that has been completed now. So if I go into the Azure portal and I refresh the screen, I should see that we've got this resource group, and underneath that resource group, we've got two resources, the storage account and the container group. So I'll look at the storage account here, and I can see under file shares, I should see the file share. If I have a look under browse, there should be no files there right now. So what I'll do next is I'll access the container image in the browser. So I'll go back into the resource group and I'll go into the container group and I'll grab the fully qualified domain name for that container instance and I'll paste that into the browser. And yep, this is the application running at the moment. So I'll put some text in here. This is what is going to be saved to the Azure File Share. So I'll say hello world, ABC. Submit that. That should write the file into the Azure File Share. So I'll go back into the Azure portal, go into the storage account, go into the file shares, access the specific file share that we created, go into browse, and here is the text file. If I download this, okay, so that's doing exactly what we expect, and we should tear down that infrastructure now because we don't need it anymore. So to do that, we can use Terraform destroy. So it'll tell you the resources that it wants to destroy. We'll say yes to that, and it'll tear down those resources for you.